Okay, well, hopefully you watched that news coverage, and I wanted to expand a little bit on what the prosecutor said. He says, dealing with a guy like this, you're tempted to call him some type of animal, but that's really not fair to animals because animals don't do things like this, Prosecutor Mark Pepmeyer told WTO, adding, this is just one sick dude. Well, I wanted to actually challenge Mr. Pepmeyer's assertion that animals don't do things like this because unfortunately they do. Here's a case where one rat is caught in the trap and the other rat is raping him. Here's an example where the hunter is displaying his deer and the hunter's dog is mounting the deer. It's really common in the animal kingdom. After the death of one member of the group or one member of the species, the others will rape that corpse. And it actually drives home the idea that this is an act of dominance. This is an act of showing, maybe they don't know that the dead body is dead. I don't know what the animals are thinking, but really showing that victim that, they're the top dog now in the case of the one on the left. I'm the top rat now. I'm in charge. So you can just clearly see the dominance there, and it helps actually bring into focus that that's what it is for the necrophiliac human also, that the person is attracted to corpses because they can dominate corpses and do whatever they want. All right, speaking of statutory rape and dominance, pedophilic disorder. So the object of pedophilic disorder is prepubescent children. So this would be children who have not yet reached puberty. It's really important for you guys to know that that's what the definition is. I hear a lot of people call a person a pedophile when they're attracted to somebody who has not yet reached the age of 18. But that's technically a different category. If a person is past puberty, so they're biologically mature, but they are not socially mature, that's called child rape or other kinds of terms in different states. In the state of Washington, we call it child rape. And it's a type of statutory rape because children can't give consent. Even if the child thinks they want to give consent, they can't legally give consent. And so it's a different category. It's called pedophilic disorder is considered a type of statutory rape because of the fact that children of any age can't give consent. But it's considered a disorder because prepubescent children are never an appropriate target for sexual impulses. Social children who have reached biological maturity, but our society has said that they are too young, that's not necessarily a disorder to be attracted to them in the way that being attracted to a child who hasn't matured is. It's something different to be attracted to people who are underage but are sexually mature. So let's talk about pedophilic disorder only and talk about, being attracted to prepubescent children. Some of the statistics. 66% of victims of pedophiles are girls between the ages of 8 and 11. I want to flip that because a lot of times the way that you frame statistics makes people think that it's more than it really is. So 66% of victims are girls, but that means that 34% of victims are boys. It also means that some victims are much younger than 8, and some can be older because people reach puberty at different ages, right? So you could be older than 11 and still be a prepubescent child. It just happens that, 8 to 11 is a really risky time because you've got children who are out and about. They're starting to get some freedom to go to their friends' houses and walk home from school by themselves or participate in sports that might put them in contact with a coach or somebody who, maybe is going to get them a ride home or other things that we trust. And so this 8 to 11-year-old range is a risky time because of all of that, sort of alone time, away from parents, away from other trusted adults, stuff like that. Speaking of trusted adults, though, 90% of victims know their perpetrator. This piece that I'm showing you at the bottom actually is from, I think it's Brazil. It's a anti-pedophilia PSA type of thing. 90% of victims know their perpetrator. So this, you can imagine for parents, they think that they can trust the person that they're letting have access to their child, and unbeknownst to them, so here in this picture, you might imagine that, well, this is Uncle Frank, and he just likes to tuck, the light, he likes to go in and tuck Emily in whenever he's visiting, and the parents are like, oh, that's so sweet that he takes such an interest in our child, and unbeknownst to them, he's not just tucking their child in. This is the heartbreak of pedophilia, that it breaks adults' trust, breaks their sense of, confidence in their own judgment, and then it has major effects on the child. So it's something it's really harmful. Now, there are different types of pedophiles. There are what we call the personally immature pedophiles, which are the ones who really have never had a mature sexual relationship. And these are the ones who are the most likely to court a child, as if that child is an appropriate partner. They oftentimes will tell the child how much they love them, and here's a ring to show you how much, I love you, and when we're allowed to, then we can get married. And, they just really make the child feel like they are an appropriate partner for them, but the child is not an appropriate partner for them. They're not threatened by children. This personally immature person is oftentimes intimidated by adult women, and I say women because it's almost always males who fall into this category. But they aren't threatened by children like they are by other adults. And so maybe they kind of see them as age cohorts, because maybe they feel sort of still like a child. And so this is almost worse in a certain way, because the child really is completely confused by this personally immature adult. They feel special because this adult has been giving them so much attention, maybe gives them gifts, things like that. The adult will tell the child, no one will understand our love, so you can't tell anyone. This is our secret. Someday when you're older, we'll be allowed to be together, but for right now, nobody can know. So they manipulate. A lot of times people will use the word groom, right? They work that child so that child thinks that this is normal and that this is desirable and this is something that they want. And so it really harms the child in the long run, not just as far as any physical things that might happen, but also those emotional and sort of confidence things that can happen as a result of sort of being tricked by this personally immature pedophile. The regressed type of pedophile has had mature relationships in the past, but something has threatened their ego or their sense of confidence or something like that, so that now they're feeling inadequate. And so they behave in ways that would have been maybe more appropriate for a person who's, much younger. So oftentimes they don't bother courting. They don't want a relationship with these children. They want to just sort of get a little excitement from taking advantage of a child who's alone or unattended. They do a lot of fondling as their primary thing that they do. They don't usually have any kind of actual coitus or any kind of oral sex or something like that. They tend to be more likely to fondle, molest a stranger. The aggressive type is the scariest, really, as far as, actually, getting through this attack, because this is a person who has a history of antisocial behavior. A lot of times it's focused a lot towards women, like women are the problem. And so they oftentimes will assault or harm a child, and knowing that it's wrong. And so then they may not want that child to be able to tell on them, so they'll kill the child. Sometimes they don't get to that point until they have gotten punished once for the behavior that they've displayed towards a child. And after they've served their time, they don't want to go back. And so they silence the child after the attack or the abuse. So we have these different degrees, and all of them sound horrible. I mean, none of them are advantageous for a child. None of them are advantageous for the family structure that the child came from. So here's the good news. After having listed them all, substantiated pedophilia cases have been going down. There has been a lot of, since 1992 at least, there's been a lot of education about what is okay touching and what's not okay touching. A lot of resources are provided to children at school about who to tell and things like that. So a lot of pedophiles are, pulled from the streets because kids have been empowered to say something. But we still have, there's a little cutoff there on the y-axis. So, our baseline is 90,000, not 0. So it's still a lot. But it has been going down over the past, 30 years. Now, when we talk about pedophilia, there are a lot of explanations for why a person may have this condition. One is prenatal androgen exposure. People who are pedophiles tend to have an altered 2D/4D ratio. If you recall, we talked about that in our chapter on sexual orientation. The 2D/4D ratio, which is your ratio of your pointer finger to your ring finger on your dominant hand, tends to be that if you're male, your pointer finger will be shorter than your ring finger. But among pedophiles, it tends to be altered. So it's possible that is evidence that they were exposed to androgens. That's the group that contains testosterone during their prenatal development, and it affected maybe not only their hands, but also their brain. We do see higher rates of left-handedness among pedophiles, which means, again, left-handedness is associated with excess testosterone in the womb. There's other things that can cause left-handedness. It sometimes runs down people's families. But otherwise, if you have a person who just out of nowhere has left-handedness, it may be that they also have other really hypermasculine behaviors and things like that is evidence of prenatal androgen exposure. So let's talk about issues like heritability, like is it in the genes? Epigenetics, which takes into consideration the genes and then life events that the person may have experienced. So stressful events during childhood, including having been sexually abused themselves, might make it more likely that a person who maybe already has the predisposition thanks to their genes to then act out in an abusive way when they are the older person in the dyad. Having had more head injuries before the age of 13 has been associated with being a pedophile. Pedophiles tend to have had more concussions or blows to the head during childhood. So maybe there literally is some kind of brain damage that's being associated. Having a lower IQ and being of shorter stature has been associated with being a pedophile. So that could have, basic, the IQ could be just purely a brain-based, cause, but it also could be genetic, right? There could be genes pairing up with environmental events. Having an increased sex drive. So now we're not giving that as an excuse. Well, they just want to have sex a lot, and so I guess sometimes it's going to be a child. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that a person who is a pedophile tends to have, higher rates of masturbation and other kinds of things that makes you wonder if maybe their serotonin levels are off or their dopamine levels are off. Like something's going on that might be driving that. I've got question marks after the things that are sort of things that are being explored. It could be functional brain alterations. I keep mentioning brain. Maybe they've got decreased prefrontal lobe inhibition or temporal lobe inhibition. Those are areas of the brain where prefrontal would be planning and judgment and inhibitions, and guilt would come out of your prefrontal lobe. Temporal lobe would be where your logic, your planning comes from. So maybe, and so you'll see there's a question mark after that. Alteration of psychological function, like somehow there's something broken in the biology leading to the thinking, right? Like something is off. And then some structural brain alterations. They've been looking at the amygdala and they've been looking at the hypothalamus. The amygdala is involved in fear and aggression, and the hypothalamus is involved in sex drive. So they're kind of looking at, maybe there's something going on. Like maybe their amygdala is smaller, their hypothalamus is smaller than it normally would be. So they're looking at those kinds of things and trying to figure out what might cause a person to end up being a pedophile. So a lot of things to be looking at, a lot of question marks on this graphic because we just don't really have the solid answers. All right, I'm going to stop here, and when we come back, we'll talk about the non-coercive paraphilias, and then we'll get into some explanations for all of these.